Good day, everybody, and welcome to another edition of the Military and Foreign Affairs Network. I am your host, the voice of reason. Today, we're continuing our ongoing coverage of the war between the Russian Federation and Ukraine. Well, things are very serious indeed right now for the Ukrainians. The Avdiivka pocket is collapsing, and to make matters worse, Victoria Nuland is in Kiev. So the political situation in Kiev between the commander of the Ukrainian military, Zaluzhny, and the president, Volodymyr Zelensky, that relationship has essentially fallen apart. They are now adversaries, and it appears that Zelensky attempted to fire Zaluzhny, and Zaluzhny apparently basically told Zelensky that he could go pound sand and he was not going to be fired. So it's interesting as that situation continues, how that will unfold. We believe that is the reason old Victoria is now in Kiev. And at the same time, the United States is not handing over large sums of cash to Zelensky, which is making things very difficult for the Ukrainian state and the Ukrainian military. Now, at the same time, you have the Russian military continuing to bear down across the entire front. We are continuing to see small-scale Russian offensive operations running all the way from Kupiansk in the north, Avdiivka in the center, and then all the way down with fighting continuing south of Kiev near Volhodar, fighting taking place on the eastern bank of the Dnieper River as well. There is thought that by the beginning of April, the situation along the entire front line for the Ukrainians will be even in a much more dire strait than what they are sitting in right now. If there is not an immediate infusion of capital and, more importantly, weapon systems. Now, the problem is the ability to continue this inflow, especially of heavy artillery rounds, tank ammunition to the Ukrainians, is becoming more and more difficult to do. Many of these stockpiles of both European and stockpiles within the United States are rapidly decreasing. Now, some of those stockpiles have been shored up by the South Koreans, but the South Koreans have to watch the North Koreans, and the South Koreans can't hand over all their 155 millimeter artillery rounds to the United States and then have the United States hand over its entire stockpile of 155 millimeter artillery rounds to the Ukrainians. So the United States and its European allies are going to have to ramp up production. That production ramp up has not yet occurred. The ramp up in production has occurred for the Russian military. The Russian military industrial complex is full steam ahead, mass producing weapons, equipment, ammunition at a much, much higher rate than we saw at the start of the conflict. If we zoom down to the area near Avdiivka, this is where we kind of started the program, and this area is not looking good for the Ukrainians. We have penetration along multiple points of the fortified city of Avdiivka. You have down here in the southeast, the Russians are actively fighting in the city. Russian infantry units are now in Avdiivka proper. We are seeing another salient starting to occur just to the north of this main salient in the southwest. We are also seeing Russians breaking into the northeastern quadrant of the city as well, this locale here. The Russians now, from their northern point of advance to the southern point of advance, are now essentially about 1.5 miles distance from the two Russian offensive penetration. Not a good situation for the Ukrainians whatsoever. And at the same time, the Ukrainians are continuing to have serious inabilities to supply and reinforce the forces in Avdiivka. If we jump over to the deep state map and have a look at what is happening, kind of the same thing. This is more of a pro-Ukrainian site, and you can kind of see where the Ukrainians are alleging that there's ongoing fighting. The gray areas are in dispute. The areas in this orange color are what is controlled by the Russians. So you can see here to the north, the deep state map is saying yes, there is fighting now in this northern quadrant of Avdiivka, as have the Russians broken into the city into the south, and there's ongoing fighting getting closer and closer to the center and the fortified redoubt of the older Soviet apartment blocks in the western portion of the city here. But not only that, we are seeing the Russians attack and advance along multiple sectors. We are continuing to see a breakthrough occurring southeast of Kupiansk. Let's do this very quickly and go back and have a look at what is happening in this area here. We're seeing the Russian 1st Guards Tank Army taking primary responsibility for this bulge or salient that is being created by Russian forces in this locale. Let's go back and just have a look at what has happened over the last several days. All right, so we're now January 15th, and we're going to speed the map up so you, the viewer, can see the progress of the Russian 1st Guards Tank Army over the course of the last 30 days. Now, if we also take a minute and we go back and we compare and contrast the Ukrainian offensive that took place back in summer, the Zaporizhzhia offensive that took place, you may see some similarities in terms of distance, in terms of ground acquired, territory acquired. Now the question is, are you hearing this in the mainstream media? And the answer to that is, no, you're not. All the mainstream media is saying right now is the following. The Russians may have the initiative. And that's it. That's all you hear. But here, we're going to show what's happening over the last, so you can see the initial breakthrough. And then we're here. So again, now we believe that the Russians are eventually looking at a drive on Kupiansk, possibly towards late summer. If things continue to shape out like they are currently, what is currently happening with the degrading of the Ukrainian military, the inability to raise new forces, the loss of existing forces, and again, the precarious amounts of ammunition and munitions the Ukrainians have to resist the Russians, again, things are not looking good. Furthermore, it appears the Russians are trying to make a drive all the way towards the Oskil River and reclaim essentially all of this area here where my cursor was, in which the Ukrainians took in the Kharkov offensive. So we will continue to watch this. We're also seeing the Russians continue to make gains in the south along the Zaporizhzhia front as well. And then again, as we've talked about before, the operations that are taking place on the eastern bank of the Dnieper River by the Ukrainians are simply a distraction. They are not worth the merit of the operation that's being conducted. Again, they are expending large amounts of highly trained light infantry forces to essentially achieve no objective. But again, they're trying to create a narrative that they crossed the Dnieper River, and again, that was purpose-driven during the failed Zaporizhzhia offensive, in which this slight bulge was created just south of Kiev. And mind you, the Russians have regained all of their pre-offensive losses in terms of the main fortification barrier just south of Kiev, near Robatna and some of these other areas. So this area here at one point controlled by the Ukrainians, not no more. The Russians are continuing to counterattack all along this front line right here. So the situation in Kiev, again, very dire. The visit by Victoria Nuland signals just how dire both the military and the political situation is in Ukraine. We're really hearing less and less about Ukraine on the mainstream media news here in the United States. And eventually you won't hear much about anything at all until the front lines for the Ukrainians eventually collapse and you see massive offensive operations by the Russians gaining large chunks of territory. Then you may start to hear some things. But outside of that, I think at this point the mainstream media is going to keep Ukraine fairly quiet and off the minds of Americans. So that's where we sit. We'll continue to report. Thanks for joining us today. As always, have a good day.